The gunshot echoed across the vast Montana wilderness, startling a flock of birds into flight as Harriet Goodwin stumbled through the underbrush, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood trickled down her arm where the bullet had grazed her, but she couldn't stop, not with her father's killers still on her trail, determined to silence the only witness to their crime. Montana Territory, 1876. The unforgiving landscape that had once seemed so full of promise now threatened to become Harriet's grave. 3 days she'd been running, sleeping in ditches and hollows, her once fine dress torn and filthy, her stomach painfully empty. She hadn't dared stop in any town, knowing her pursuers would be watching for her. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the rugged landscape with hues of orange and red as Harriet's strength finally gave out. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed beside a small creek, her fingers digging into the cool mud. The water looked so inviting, but she could barely summon the energy to cup her hands and bring the life-giving liquid to her parched lips. "This is where it ends," she whispered to herself, her voice cracked and hollow. She was 23 years old and about to die in the wilderness, far from the Boston society where she'd been raised. Her father had brought her west to start anew after her mother's death, and now she was alone, hunted like an animal. Darkness was falling rapidly when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. Harriet tried to push herself up to find somewhere to hide, but her limbs refused to cooperate. All she could do was press herself against the base of a cottonwood tree and pray that whoever was coming would pass her by. The rider appeared through the trees, a tall figure silhouetted against the dying light. He slowed his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, and Harriet held her breath. Perhaps he hadn't seen her, perhaps he would continue on his way, but the man dismounted gracefully, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He approached cautiously, leading his horse behind him. "Miss." His voice was deep with the hint of a drawl. "Are you hurt?" Harriet tried to scoot backward, away from the stranger, but there was nowhere to go. Her heart hammered in her chest as the man crouched down a respectful distance away. In the fading light, she could make out a weathered face beneath the brim of his hat, a face that looked to be in its early 30s, with eyes that showed concern rather than threat. "I won't harm you," he said softly, holding up his hands to show they were empty. "My name's Finley Ross. I have a ranch about 5 miles east of here." Harriet swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. "Please," she managed to whisper, "there are men after me." Finley Ross's expression hardened. "What men?" "They killed my father," she said, tears welling in her eyes, 3 days ago. "They're looking for me because I saw them do it." The cowboy's gaze swept over her, taking in her bedraggled appearance and the dried blood on her arm. His jaw tightened as he made a decision. "Can you stand?" he asked. Harriet tried, but her legs gave out again. Without another word, Finley moved forward, gently helping her to her feet. When it became clear she couldn't support herself, he swept her into his arms with surprising gentleness for a man who looked so rugged. "I'm taking you to my ranch," he said as he carried her to his horse. "You need food and rest, and that arm needs tending." He lifted her onto his horse before mounting behind her, one strong arm wrapped around her waist to keep her from falling. Harriet was too exhausted to protest, too desperate for safety to question his motives. "Thank you," she murmured, her head lolling against his chest as the horse began to move. Finley Ross looked down at the woman in his arms, her hair matted from sleeping in the dirt, her clothes torn and soiled. Something protective stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. "Tonight you rest under my roof," the cowboy said with quiet resolve as they rode through the gathering darkness. "And tomorrow we'll figure out who's hunting you." The ranch house appeared as a silhouette against the star-studded sky after an hour's ride. It wasn't large, but it was solid, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and a barn nearby. A dog's bark announced their arrival, and a lantern light appeared at the door. "Finley, that you?" called an older woman's voice. "It's me, Martha," Finley replied as he guided his horse to the hitching post. "And I've brought someone who needs our help." The woman who stepped onto the porch was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Harriet and hurried forward. "Lord have mercy," she exclaimed. "What happened to this poor child?" She's been running from some men who killed her father, Finley explained as he carefully dismounted, keeping Harriet steady. She's exhausted and hurt. Martha's face softened with compassion. Bring her inside, quickly. I'll heat some water and find some clean clothes. Harriet tried to focus on what was happening, but the world was spinning around her. The sudden safety, the promise of food and clean water, was overwhelming after days of terror. She felt Finley lift her again, carrying her up the porch steps and into the warmth of the house. The interior was simply furnished, but clean and well kept. Finley placed her gently in a wooden rocking chair near the hearth, where a small fire was burning. Martha was my mother's closest friend, he explained as the older woman bustled about, gathering supplies. She's been keeping house for me since my parents passed 5 years ago. Harriet nodded weakly, struggling to keep her eyes open. Martha returned with a basin of steaming water and clean cloths. Let's get you cleaned up, dear, she said kindly. Then some food and rest. I'll tend to Thunderbolt, Finley said, referring to his horse. And keep watch outside just in case those men tracked her this far. As he moved toward the door, Harriet reached out a trembling hand. Mr. Ross, she called, her voice barely audible. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. A shadow of a smile crossed his face. Get some rest, miss. Goodwin, she supplied. Harriet Goodwin. Miss Goodwin, he nodded. You're safe now. After Finley left, Martha helped Harriet wash the grime from her face and hands, then tended to the wound on her arm. Just a graze, thank the Lord, Martha pronounced. It'll heal clean if we keep it covered. She helped Harriet into a simple cotton nightgown that was slightly too large. This was Finley's sister's, she explained. Rebecca moved to Denver after she married, but she left some things behind. Martha brought a bowl of hearty stew and fresh bread, which Harriet ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be her last. When she had finished, Martha showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom on the second floor. Sleep as long as you need, the older woman said. No one will harm you here. Harriet sank onto the soft mattress, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. Why are you helping me? She asked softly. Martha's expression grew serious. That's the way of things out here, child. The good folks look out for each other. It's the only way to survive. Finley's a good man. One of the best I know. With those words, Martha left Harriet alone. For the first time in days, Harriet allowed herself to relax, the tension draining from her body as exhaustion claimed her. Her last thought before sleep took her was of the cowboy's steady arms carrying her to safety and the deep voice that had promised her shelter. Outside, Finley completed his final check of the property, rifle in hand. He'd positioned himself on the porch where he could see anyone approaching from any direction. The night was quiet except for the usual sounds of the wilderness, an owl hooting in the distance, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman sleeping in his house. There had been something in her eyes, not just fear, but a determination, a fire that hadn't been extinguished despite whatever ordeal she'd endured. Finley had seen plenty of desperate people in his 34 years, but something about Harriet Goodwin stirred his protective instincts like nothing had before. As the stars wheeled overhead, Finley remained vigilant, determined that no harm would come to her. Not tonight. Not while she was under his roof. Morning came with a gentle knock on the bedroom door. Harriet opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly. Miss Goodwin, Martha called. I've brought you some clean clothes and breakfast, if you're feeling up to it. Harriet ran a hand through her tangled hair. Yes, please come in. Martha entered carrying a tray and a bundle of clothing. She set the tray on a small table by the window and laid the clothes at the foot of the bed. These were Rebecca's too, she explained. They might be a bit large, but they'll do until we can get you something better. Harriet looked down at her hands, embarrassed by her circumstances. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. Martha waved away her concerns. Eat your breakfast first. Then, if you're feeling strong enough, Finley would like to speak with you about what happened. After Martha left, Harriet ate the hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with honey. Then she washed using the basin of water Martha had provided and dressed in the borrowed clothes, a simple blue cotton dress. that was indeed a bit loose but clean and whole. She found a brush on the dresser and worked patiently through the tangles in her long brown hair until it hung in smooth waves down her back. When she finally made her way downstairs, she found Finley at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. He stood when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Miss Goodwin," he greeted her, "you're looking much better this morning." "Thanks to you and Martha," she replied. "I don't know how to thank you both." "No thanks needed," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from him. "But I do need to know what happened. Who's after you and why?" Harriet sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "My father was Edward Goodwin. He was a banker from Boston. After my mother died last year, he decided we needed a fresh start. He had a friend in Helena who offered him a position at the Territorial Bank there." Finley nodded. "I've been to Helena a few times. It's growing fast." "We arrived 3 weeks ago," Harriet continued. "Father was just getting settled into his new position when—" Her voice faltered. "Take your time," Finley said gently. Harriet took a deep breath. 3 days ago, I was waiting for Father to finish work. His office has a window that looks out onto a side alley. I saw 3 men enter through the back door. They weren't supposed to be there. I could tell by the way they were acting. Something made me hide instead of calling for help." Her hands began to tremble, and Finley pushed his coffee cup toward her. She took a grateful sip before continuing. "They confronted my father. They were demanding something papers, I think. He refused, and one of them shot him." Tears welled in her eyes. "I must have made a sound because they started searching for me. I ran out the front door and just kept running. I knew they'd kill me too if they found me." "Did you recognize any of these men?" Finley asked, his voice hard. Harriet nodded slowly. "One of them. His name is Victor Blackwood. He's been trying to buy up land all around Helena. My father mentioned that some of his loan applications seemed suspicious, like he was using the bank to launder money from other activities." Finley's expression darkened. "Blackwood, I know the name. He's got interests in mining, gambling houses, and worse. Rumor has it he's behind several stagecoach robberies in the territory. The law in Helena there in his pocket," Harriet said. "Father discovered that the local sheriff had received substantial payments from Blackwood. That's why I couldn't go to the authorities." "So you ran," Finley concluded. "And they've been tracking you since?" "Yes, I tried to stay off the main trails, but they found my trail yesterday morning. That's when one of them shot at me." She touched her bandaged arm. "I was lucky it was just a graze." Finley was silent for a long moment, considering everything she'd told him. "These men, did they see which way you were heading last night?" "I don't think so," Harriet replied. "I lost them in the hills before sundown, but they won't stop looking. They know I can identify them." "You need more than just a hiding place," Finley said. "You need a way to bring these men to justice." Harriet laughed bitterly. "How? The local law won't help me, and I have no proof beyond my word." "The territorial marshal might listen," Finley suggested. "His office is in Virginia City, but he has deputies throughout the territory, men who don't answer to local sheriffs." Hope flickered in Harriet's eyes. "Do you know how to contact him?" "I can get word to him," Finley confirmed, "but it might take some time." "Until then, you'll stay here where it's safe." "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," Finley interrupted firmly. "I have plenty of room, and Martha would appreciate the company." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She's been trying to civilize me for years without much success." Despite everything, Harriet found herself smiling back. There was something reassuring about Finley Ross's steadiness that made her feel that perhaps everything would be all right after all. "Now," Finley said, rising from the table, "I have chores to attend to. Martha will show you around the place. The ranch isn't large, but we're self-sufficient for the most part." "Mr. Ross," Harriet called as he headed for the door, "what if they track me here? I don't want to bring danger to you and Martha." Finley turned, his expression serious. "Miss Goodwin, I've been handling danger since I was 15 years old. This is my land, and no one threatens what's under my protection." With that, he left, the door closing firmly behind him. Harriet sat quietly, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a proper Boston lady trying to adapt to frontier life. Now she was a fugitive, dependent on the protection of a rancher she'd just met. Yet somehow, She felt safer here in this simple ranch house than she had anywhere since her mother's death. Martha returned a short while later, and as promised, she gave Harriet a tour of the Ross Ranch. It consisted of the main house, a sturdy barn, a corral, a chicken coop, and several fenced pastures where cattle grazed. Beyond the immediate ranch buildings, Harriet could see rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains. Finley's father built this place with his own hands, Martha explained as they walked. Came out here in '47 with nothing but a wagon and dreams. Built it up bit by bit until it was one of the finest small spreads in the territory. It's beautiful, Harriet said sincerely. So peaceful, Martha smiled. That it is most days, though Finley's had his share of troubles, lost his wife and baby 6 years ago to fever. Then his parents the year after in a wagon accident. Harriet felt a pang of sympathy. How terrible for him. He's a strong man, Martha said. Keeps to himself mostly, focuses on the ranch, but he's got a good heart, helps folks when they need it like you. They walked back toward the house, and Martha pointed to a small vegetable garden on the south side. I tend that myself, nothing fancy, but we eat well enough. You're welcome to help if you've a mind to. I'd like that, Harriet replied. I want to be useful while I'm here. Martha patted her arm. You just focus on healing first, child. There'll be plenty of time for work later. The day passed quietly. Harriet helped Martha with preparing lunch and dinner, and in between, she sat on the porch, watching Finley work with the horses in the corral. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, confident and sure, his body working in harmony with the animals. Occasionally, he would glance toward the house, and Harriet would quickly look away, not wanting him to catch her staring. That evening after dinner, Finley announced his plan. I'll ride to the telegraph office in Clearwater tomorrow. It's a small settlement about 15 miles south. I can send a message to the territorial marshal from there. Won't that be dangerous? Harriet asked, if Blackwood's men are searching the area. Clearwater's in the opposite direction from Helena, Finley explained, and I'll be careful. No one will follow me back here. I should go with you, Harriet suggested. I could give a statement directly. No, Finley said firmly. It's safer for you to stay here with Martha. The fewer people who see you, the better. Harriet wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his words. How long will you be gone? I should be back by nightfall, he replied. Martha's a fine shot if anyone comes around, but I don't expect trouble. Later, as Harriet prepared for bed, she heard the soft strains of a harmonica coming from outside. She moved to the window and saw Finley sitting on the porch steps, the silver instrument at his lips as he played a haunting, melancholy tune. The music spoke of loneliness and loss, and Harriet felt tears sting her eyes as she listened. This man had lost so much, yet he'd opened his home to a stranger in need without hesitation. In the short time she'd known him, Finley Ross had shown more genuine kindness than most of the gentlemen she'd known in Boston society. As the music continued to float through the night air, Harriet made a silent promise to herself. Somehow, she would find a way to repay his kindness, and perhaps, in doing so, bring some light back into his solitary life. Dawn was breaking when Harriet woke to the sounds of movement downstairs. She dressed quickly in another of Rebecca's dresses, this one a simple brown calico, and made her way to the kitchen. Finley was already there, strapping on a gun belt while Martha packed food into a saddlebag. You're leaving already? Harriet asked, trying to hide her disappointment. Finley nodded. Best to get an early start. I want to be back before dark. Martha handed him the packed saddlebag. There's enough food for 2 meals, and I put in some of that blackberry preserves you like so much. Thank you, Martha. Finley turned to Harriet. Stay close to the house today. Martha knows what to do if there's trouble. Harriet stepped forward, suddenly anxious about his departure. Please be careful, Mr. Ross. Something in her voice must have reached him because his expression softened slightly. I always am, Miss Goodwin. With a tip of his hat, he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading as he rode away from the ranch. Harriet felt a strange emptiness at his departure, which surprised her. She barely knew this man, yet the thought of him riding into potential danger on her behalf made her heart clench with worry. He'll be fine, Martha said, seeming to read her thoughts. Finley knows this territory better than most, and he's no stranger to handling himself in difficult situations. Harriet nodded, trying to appear reassured. Is there anything I can help with today? As a matter of fact, there is, Martha replied. I need to make soap today, and an extra pair of hands would be welcome. The day passed in a flurry of domestic activities. Harriet helped Martha make soap, churn butter, and bake bread. The physical work was a welcome distraction from her worries, and she found herself enjoying the simple tasks that were so different from her life in Boston. You're quite handy for a city girl, Martha observed as they worked. Harriet smiled. My mother believed that a lady should know how to run a household, even if she had servants to do the actual work. She taught me a lot before she passed. She sounds like a wise woman, Martha said. My own mother was the same way. Said you never know when you might have to do for yourself, so best be prepared. As the afternoon wore on, Harriet found herself repeatedly glancing toward the window, watching for any sign of Finley's return. The hours seemed to crawl by, and as the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, her anxiety grew. He should have been back by now, shouldn't he? She asked Martha as they finished washing the dishes from their evening meal. Martha checked the clock on the mantel. There's still daylight left, don't fret yourself just yet. But as darkness fell and there was still no sign of Finley, even Martha began to look concerned. She lit a lantern and placed it in the window, a beacon to guide him home. Sometimes business takes longer than expected, she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Could be the telegraph operator wasn't available right away, or maybe he ran into someone who needed help. Harriet nodded, but her mind was racing with darker possibilities. What if Blackwood's men had somehow found him? What if he was lying injured somewhere, unable to return? I think I'll step outside for some fresh air, Harriet said, needing to escape the confines of the house. The night air was cool against her skin as she stood on the porch, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The stars shone brilliantly overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The vastness of the Montana wilderness had never felt more oppressive. She was about to return inside when she heard the faint sound of hoofbeats approaching. Harriet strained her eyes, peering into the darkness, her heart pounding with hope and fear. Martha, she called. I think someone's coming. The older woman appeared beside her, a shotgun in her hands. Get behind me, child. Can't be too careful. They watched as a rider emerged from the shadows, and Harriet felt a surge of relief as she recognized Finley's broad-shouldered silhouette. But something was wrong. He was slumped forward in the saddle, and his horse was moving at an unusually slow pace. He's hurt, Harriet gasped, rushing down the porch steps despite Martha's warning. She reached Finley just as he guided his horse to a stop near the hitching post. In the dim light from the house, she could see a dark stain spreading across his left shoulder. Mr. Ross. She cried, reaching up to steady him. What happened? Finley grimaced as he dismounted, nearly falling before Harriet caught him around the waist. Ran into some trouble, he muttered. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about, Harriet repeated incredulously. You're bleeding. Martha had joined them, her experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. Let's get him inside. Harriet, help me with him. Together, they managed to get Finley into the house and seated in a chair by the fire. Martha cut away his bloodied shirt to reveal a gunshot wound to his left shoulder. Clean through, she pronounced after examination. Missed anything vital from the looks of it. You're lucky, Finley Ross. Didn't feel particularly lucky at the time, he replied through gritted teeth. Who did this? Harriet demanded, her voice shaking with anger and fear. Was it Blackwood's men? Finley nodded grimly. 2 of them were in Clearwater, asking questions about a young woman matching your description. They must have been working their way through every settlement in the area. Did they see you? Martha asked as she cleaned the wound. Not until after I'd sent the telegram, Finley replied. I was leaving the telegraph office when they spotted me. Something must have made them suspicious because they followed me out of town. And they shot you, Harriet whispered, horrified. I shot back, Finley said with grim satisfaction. One of them won't be following anyone again. The other one ran off. Martha finished cleaning the wound and began preparing a poultice. This needs stitching and you need rest. That telegram had better be worth all this trouble. It will be, Finley said, his eyes finding Harriet's. Marshal Jenkins is a good man. He'll be in Helena within the week to investigate personally. Relief washed over Harriet, tempered by the knowledge that Finley had been wounded because of her. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "This is all my fault." "No," Finley said firmly, wincing as Martha began stitching his wound. "Blackwood and his men are to blame, not you. Never think otherwise." Once Martha had finished tending to his wound and helped him into a clean shirt, Harriet insisted on bringing him food and coffee. He ate sparingly, clearly exhausted from his ordeal. "You should rest now," Martha told him. "That shoulder needs time to heal." "I need to keep watch," Finley protested weakly, "if that other man tracks me back here." "I'll take the first watch," Martha said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Harriet can take over later. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from blood loss." Too tired to argue further, Finley allowed the women to help him to his bedroom. As Harriet turned to leave, he caught her hand. "I'd do it again," he said quietly. "Don't blame yourself." Harriet squeezed his hand gently. "Rest now. We'll talk more tomorrow." Later that night, as Harriet sat on the porch with Martha's shotgun across her lap, she replayed Finley's words in her mind. There was something in the way he had looked at her, something beyond the pain and exhaustion that had made her heart beat faster. She gazed up at the stars, wondering how her life had changed so dramatically in such a short time. A week ago, she had been a proper young lady from Boston, concerned with social niceties and her father's approval. Now she was sitting guard on a ranch porch with a shotgun, protecting a wounded cowboy who had risked his life for her. Strangely, despite all the danger and uncertainty, Harriet felt more alive than she had in years. The artifice of her previous life had been stripped away, leaving only what truly mattered: courage, compassion, and connection. As dawn approached, Martha came to relieve her. "Any sign of trouble?" The older woman asked. "None," Harriet replied. "It's been perfectly quiet." "Good. Go get some rest now. I have a feeling we'll all need our strength in the days ahead." Harriet nodded, handing over the shotgun. Before heading inside, she paused. "Martha, do you think Finley will be all right?" The older woman's expression softened. "That man has survived worse, child. Don't you worry about him." But Harriet did worry, and as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams were filled with images of Finley Ross wounded, vulnerable, yet still standing between her and danger, protecting her from the men who sought to silence her forever. The next morning, Harriet woke later than usual, the strain of the night watch having taken its toll. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs, concerned about Finley's condition. She found him at the kitchen table, his left arm in a sling but otherwise looking remarkably alert for a man who had been shot the day before. Martha was at the stove, frying bacon and eggs. "Good morning," Harriet said hesitantly, surprised to see him up. Finley nodded in greeting. "Miss Goodwin. I hope you were able to get some rest after your watch." "I was, thank you." She took a seat across from him. "How is your shoulder?" "Sore," he admitted, "but Martha says the wound is clean, no signs of infection." Martha brought plates of food to the table. "He's too stubborn to stay in bed where he belongs," she said with affectionate exasperation. "Says he needs to check on the cattle today." "Surely that can wait," Harriet protested. "You need to recover your strength." Finley's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "The cattle don't wait for anyone, Miss Goodwin, but I've agreed to let Jackson help with the heaviest work." "Jackson?" Harriet asked. "My foreman," Finley explained. "He lives in the bunkhouse with the other hands about a quarter-mile west of here. Usually it's just the three of us at this time of year, but we hire more men during roundup and branding." As they ate breakfast, Finley outlined his plan for the coming days. The marshal should be in Helena by the end of the week. "Once he's investigated and arrested Blackwood, it will be safe for you to go into town and give your statement." "And until then?" Harriet asked. "Until then, you stay here where it's safe," Finley said firmly. "Jackson and the men will keep a lookout for strangers. If anyone comes asking questions, they know to send them on their way without mentioning you." Harriet nodded, grateful for his thoroughness. "I wish there was more I could do to help." "You can help by staying alive to testify against Blackwood," Finley replied. "Without your eyewitness account, he might go free." After breakfast, Finley went outside to meet with Jackson, despite Martha's continued protests about his condition. Left alone with the older woman, Harriet helped clear the table and wash the dishes. "He's pushing himself too hard," Harriet commented as they worked. Martha sighed. "That's Finley's way, never could sit still when there was work to be done, even as a boy. His father was the same." "You've known him a long time then, since the day he was born," Martha confirmed. "His mother, Elizabeth, was my dearest friend. We came west on the same wagon train, both of us new brides. When she and James died, there was nowhere else I'd rather be than here, helping Finley keep this place going." Harriet hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Martha, Finley mentioned that he lost his wife and child. What happened?" Martha's expression grew sad. "Scarlet fever 6 years ago. His wife Caroline and their baby daughter Emily. She was only 6 months old. It nearly broke him." "How terrible," Harriet murmured, "to lose so much." "He withdrew into himself after that," Martha continued. "Focused on the ranch, worked from dawn till dusk. Wouldn't let anyone get close. That's why I was so surprised when he brought you here. It's the first time in years I've seen him reach out to someone." Harriet felt a flutter in her chest at Martha's words. "He's a good man," she said softly. "I owe him my life." Martha gave her a knowing look. "Sometimes, child, saving someone else is a way of saving yourself too." Later that day, Harriet ventured outside to the vegetable garden where Martha had asked her to pick some beans for dinner. As she worked, she heard the sound of hammering coming from the barn. Curious, she finished her task and walked over to investigate. She found Finley inside, attempting to repair a broken stall door one-handed, his wounded arm still in its sling. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled with the task. "Mr. Ross," she called, "should you be doing that with your injury?" He looked up, surprised by her presence. "It needs fixing before we bring in the new horses next week." "At least let me help," she offered, stepping forward. "I can hold things steady while you hammer." Finley looked as if he might refuse, but then nodded. "Much obliged." They worked together in companionable silence for a while, Harriet holding the boards in place while Finley secured them. Despite his injury, his movements were precise and efficient, and Harriet found herself admiring his capable hands and the quiet concentration in his expression. "You're good at this," he commented after they had repaired the door. "Not many city ladies would know how to help with barn repairs." "I'm a quick learner," she replied with a small smile. "And my father always said that practical skills were more valuable than ornamental ones." "Your father sounds like a sensible man," Finley said, his expression softening. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Goodwin, truly." "Thank you," Harriet said, blinking back unexpected tears. In the chaos of her flight and the subsequent events, she hadn't had time to properly grieve. "He was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened to him." "Few people get what they deserve in this life," Finley observed grimly. "Good or bad." Harriet studied his face, seeing the lines of hardship and loss etched there. "Martha told me about your wife and daughter." "I'm sorry for your loss as well." Finley stiffened, and for a moment Harriet feared she had overstepped, but then his shoulders sagged slightly. "It was a long time ago. Does it get easier?" she asked softly. "The grief." He was quiet for so long that Harriet thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Not easier, different. Like a wound that scars over. It doesn't hurt the same way, but you're changed by it." Their eyes met, and Harriet felt a connection forming between them, a shared understanding of loss that went beyond words. The moment stretched, charged with unspoken emotions until Finley looked away. "We should head back to the house," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Martha will be wondering where we've gotten to." As they walked back together, Harriet was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the height and breadth of him, the subtle scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. Something was changing between them, something that both thrilled and frightened her. For the first time since her father's murder, Harriet allowed herself to think beyond mere survival. To consider the possibility of a future one that might include the quiet, steadfast cowboy who had offered her shelter when she needed it most. The days fell into a rhythm as Harriet adjusted to life on the Ross ranch. Each morning, she would help Martha with breakfast, then tackle whatever chores needed doing around the house. In the afternoons, She often found herself seeking out Finley's company, offering to help with tasks that he could manage despite his injured shoulder. They worked together mending tack in the barn, checking the chicken coop for eggs, and tending to the vegetable garden. With each passing day, the silences between them grew more comfortable, and Harriet discovered new facets of Finley's character: his dry sense of humor, his encyclopedic knowledge of the land and its creatures, his thoughtful nature. She also became aware of the way his gaze would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking, and of the warmth that spread through her chest whenever their hands accidentally touched. On the fourth day after Finley's trip to Clearwater, Jackson rode in with news from town. "Marshal Jenkins arrived in Helena yesterday," he reported as they gathered around the kitchen table. "Word is he's already arrested one of Blackwood's men, found him in the doctor's office getting patched up from a gunshot wound." Finley nodded in satisfaction. "That would be the one I hit." "Any sign of Blackwood himself?" Jackson shook his head. "Not yet, but the marshals got deputies searching every saloon and gambling hall in town. It's just a matter of time." "What about the local sheriff?" Harriet asked. "The one in Blackwood's pocket." "Resigned suddenly," Jackson said with a grin. "Packed up and left town in the middle of the night, from what I hear." "Rats deserting a sinking ship," Martha commented as she poured coffee for everyone. Finley turned to Harriet. "This is good news. Once Blackwood is in custody, you'll be able to make your statement to the marshal and start rebuilding your life." Harriet nodded, though she felt a strange reluctance at the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Finley. "Yes, that's good news indeed." That evening after dinner, Harriet found herself alone with Finley on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from the nearby meadow. "It's beautiful here," Harriet said softly. "So different from Boston." "Do you miss it?" Finley asked. "The city," Harriet considered the question. "I miss certain things: concerts, bookshops, the energy of so many people in one place, but there's a freedom here that I never knew there. A sense that you can be yourself without constantly worrying about social expectations." Finley nodded in understanding. "The territory has its own rules, but they're simpler, more honest." "Is that why you stay?" she asked. "For the honesty of it?" "I stay because this land is in my blood," he replied, his gaze sweeping over the ranch. "My father taught me to love it, to respect it. Even when it's harsh and unforgiving, it's home." "I envy that," Harriet admitted, "having such a strong sense of belonging somewhere." Finley turned to look at her, his expression suddenly intense. "What will you do, Miss Goodwin, after all this is over?" The question caught her off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead. I suppose I'll need to settle my father's affairs, decide whether to return to Boston or... He prompted when she trailed off. "Or find a new place to belong," she finished softly. Their eyes met, and Harriet felt the air between them grow charged with possibility. Finley took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "Harriet," he said, her given name sounding different in his deep voice. The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching riders. Finley instantly went on alert, reaching for the rifle that leaned against the porch rail. "Get inside," he ordered, all trace of softness gone from his voice. Now, Harriet hesitated, reluctant to leave him. "Please," he added more gently. "I need to know you're safe." She nodded and hurried inside, her heart pounding with fear, not for herself but for him. Through the window, she watched as Finley moved to the edge of the porch, rifle raised, as 3 riders approached the house. Martha appeared beside her, shotgun in hand. "Who is it?" she asked tensely. "I don't know," Harriet replied. 3 men. They watched anxiously as the riders came to a stop a respectful distance from the house. One of them called out, "Finley Ross, Marshal Jenkins sent us. We're deputy marshals." Finley didn't lower his rifle. "Show me your badges, nice and slow." The men complied, and after a tense moment, Finley's posture relaxed slightly. He gestured toward the house, and Martha opened the door. "It's all right," he said. "They're legitimate." The deputies dismounted and approached the porch. The leader, a weathered man with a salt and pepper beard, introduced himself. "Deputy Marshal Thomas Harding, Miss Goodwin," he said with a respectful nod. "Marshal Jenkins sent us to escort you to Helena. He's got Victor Blackwood in custody, but he needs your testimony to make the charges stick." "Blackwood's been arrested?" Harriet asked, relief washing over her. "Yes, madam," Harding confirmed. "Caught him trying to board a stage out of town. He didn't go quietly, but he's behind bars now." "When do you need to leave?" Finley asked, his expression unreadable. "First light tomorrow would be best," Harding replied. "The marshal wants to move quickly on this case before Blackwood's associates can cause any more trouble." Harriet felt a pang of dismay at the thought of leaving so suddenly. She looked at Finley, hoping to see some sign that he shared her reluctance, but his face remained impassive. "Of course," she said finally. "I'll be ready." Martha took charge of the situation, inviting the deputies to stable their horses and offering them coffee. As the men moved toward the barn, Harriet found herself alone with Finley once more. "It seems this is coming to an end sooner than expected," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Finley nodded. "It's for the best. You'll be safe in Helena with the marshal's protection, and once you've given your testimony, you can decide what comes next." "Yes," Harriet agreed, though her heart ached at his matter-of-fact tone. Had she imagined the moment they'd shared before the deputies arrived? The connection she thought was growing between them. "I should pack my things," she said when Finley offered nothing more. "Not that I have much to pack. Martha can help you with that," he replied. "I need to speak with the deputies about the route they're planning to take tomorrow." With that, he walked away, leaving Harriet standing alone on the porch, feeling as if something precious was slipping through her fingers before she'd even had the chance to grasp it fully. That night, dinner was a subdued affair despite the presence of the deputies. Harriet picked at her food, her appetite diminished by the knowledge that this would be her last night at the Ross Ranch. Martha had helped her pack Rebecca's dresses and a few other necessities into a small valise, and the reality of her imminent departure weighed heavily on her. Finley was unusually quiet as well, speaking only when directly addressed by the deputies. His eyes rarely met Harriet's across the table, and when they did, she couldn't read the emotions behind them. After the meal, the deputies retired to the bunkhouse where Jackson had arranged accommodations for them. Martha busied herself with preparations for breakfast, leaving Harriet and Finley alone in the sitting room. An awkward silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Finally, Harriet could bear it no longer. "Mr. Ross Finley, I want to thank you properly for everything you've done for me. You saved my life, and I will never forget your kindness." Finley looked up from the fire he'd been staring into. "You don't need to thank me, Miss Goodwin." "Harriet," she corrected gently. "After everything, I think you could call me Harriet." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Harriet, then." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Before the deputies arrived, I think we were about to have a conversation, one I very much wanted to hear." Finley's expression grew guarded. "It doesn't matter now. You're leaving in the morning." "It matters to me," Harriet insisted, moving to sit beside him on the sofa. "What were you going to say?" He was silent for so long that she feared he wouldn't answer. Then, with a resigned sigh, he said, "I was going to ask if you might consider staying here at the ranch." Harriet's heart leapt. "You want me to stay? It's selfish of me," he admitted, not quite meeting her eyes. "You have a life waiting for you, Boston society culture, everything this place lacks, but these past days, having you here. It's brought something back to this house that's been missing for a long time." "Life," Harriet whispered, understanding perfectly. "It's brought life back." Finley nodded, finally looking at her directly. "I know it's too soon, we barely know each other, and you're still grieving your father. I have no right to ask you to stay, especially when you have so much to sort through. But I couldn't let you leave without at least telling you that I've come to care for you, Harriet." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. "I've come to care for you too, Finley." "More than I thought possible in such a short time." Hope flared in his eyes. "Then you'll consider it, coming back here after you've testified." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'll come back, not just to consider staying, but to stay if you'll have me, if I'll have you." He repeated incredulously, "Harriet, you must know there's nothing I want more." The distance between them seemed to vanish as Finley reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they closed around hers. With his other hand, he tentatively touched her cheek, his expression a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "May I?" he asked softly. In answer, Harriet leaned forward, closing the final inches between them. Their lips met in a kiss that was tender at first, then deepened as Finley pulled her closer. Harriet felt as if her heart might burst from the sweetness of it, from the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Finley rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he confessed. "After Caroline died, I was certain that part of me was gone forever." "I understand," Harriet said. "When my mother passed and then my father, I felt so alone, as if I'd never belong anywhere again. But here, with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was searching for." They sat together by the fire until the embers began to die, talking of the future of Harriet's testimony in Helena, of the time they would need to be apart, of all the possibilities that awaited when she returned to the ranch. "It won't be easy," Finley warned. "Ranch life is hard, even in the best of times, and there will be those who gossip about a Boston lady choosing to live with a widowed rancher." "Let them gossip," Harriet replied with newfound confidence. "I've seen enough of society's judgments to know they matter far less than truth and happiness." When it came time to say goodnight, Finley walked Harriet to the foot of the stairs. "I'll ride with you to Helena tomorrow," he decided. "My shoulder's healing well enough for the journey." "Are you sure?" Harriet asked, concerned. "Martha won't approve." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his features and made Harriet's heart skip. "Martha rarely approves of my decisions, but she respects them nonetheless. Besides, I want to be there when you face Blackwood." "You shouldn't have to do that alone." Impulsively, Harriet rose on tiptoe and kissed him again, brief but heartfelt. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Harriet felt a curious mixture of emotions: sorrow at leaving the ranch, determination to see justice done for her father, and above all, a buoyant hope for the future that awaited her when she returned. For the first time since her father's murder, she felt as if the pieces of her shattered life were beginning to come together in a new pattern, one that included the steadfast cowboy who had found her at her lowest moment and offered her not just shelter, but the promise of a home. The journey to Helena took 2 days, with the party stopping overnight at a small way station halfway through the trip. Finley rode beside Harriet for most of the way, his presence a constant reassurance as they traveled through the rugged Montana landscape. Deputy Marshal Harding and his men were vigilant, watching for any sign of trouble, but the journey passed without incident. As they approached Helena on the afternoon of the second day, Harriet felt her anxiety rising at the thought of confronting Victor Blackwood and reliving her father's murder. Finley seemed to sense her unease. "You don't have to face him alone," he reminded her quietly as the buildings of Helena came into view. "I'll be right there with you." Harriet nodded gratefully, drawing strength from his confidence. "I know, that's what gives me courage." Marshal Jenkins met them at his office, a tall, authoritative man with keen eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He shook Finley's hand with obvious respect. "Ross, good to see you again. Heard you had a run-in with one of Blackwood's men." "Nothing serious," Finley replied modestly, touching his still healing shoulder. The marshal turned to Harriet. "Miss Goodwin, I can't tell you how sorry I am about your father. Edward Goodwin was a respected banker, and his murder has outraged this community. With your testimony, we'll make sure Blackwood pays for what he did." "Thank you, Marshal," Harriet said. "I'm ready to tell you everything I saw." For the next several hours, Harriet gave her statement, recounting in detail the events of that terrible day. Finley remained by her side throughout, his steady presence helping her maintain her composure even when the memories threatened to overwhelm her. "You've been incredibly brave, Miss Goodwin," Marshal Jenkins said when she had finished. "Your testimony, combined with the evidence we've gathered and the confession of one of Blackwood's men, should be more than enough to see him hang." "When will the trial be?" Harriet asked. "The circuit judge arrives next week," the marshal explained. "We'll hold the trial then. In the meantime, I've arranged for you to stay at the Grand Hotel under guard. Blackwood still has friends in town who might try to cause trouble." "I'll be staying as well," Finley stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. The marshal nodded, unsurprised. I figured as much. I'll have rooms prepared for both of you. That evening, after settling into the hotel, Harriet and Finley had dinner in a private dining room the marshal had arranged for them. It was the first proper meal they'd had since leaving the ranch, and despite the circumstances, Harriet found herself enjoying the relative luxury. It feels strange to be in town again, she commented as they ate. After the peace of your ranch, everything here seems so noisy and chaotic. Finley smiled. I feel the same way whenever I come to Helena. Give me open country any day. Yet you came here for me, Harriet said softly. Thank you for that. I'd go much further for you, Harriet, he replied, his eyes holding hers across the table. Anywhere you needed me to be. The simple declaration warmed her more than any elaborate proclamation could have. In Finley's world, words weren't used casually when he said something. He meant it with his whole heart. The week leading up to the trial passed in a blur of preparations. Harriet met with the prosecutor, rehearsed her testimony, and tried to prepare herself emotionally for facing Blackwood in court. Finley was a constant presence, offering quiet support and occasional distractions when the stress became too much. On the morning of the trial, Harriet dressed in a simple but elegant black dress that the prosecutor had suggested would make a favorable impression on the judge and jury. As she pinned up her hair, her hands trembled slightly at the thought of what lay ahead. A knock at her hotel room door revealed Finley, dressed more formally than she had ever seen him in a clean suit coat, though he still wore his usual boots. You look beautiful, he said when she opened the door. And strong, your father would be proud. Harriet blinked back tears. I hope so. I just want justice for him. You'll get it, Finley assured her. Blackwood's days of terrorizing this territory are over, thanks to you. The courthouse was packed when they arrived, word of the trial having spread throughout Helena. Marshal Jenkins escorted them through the crowd to seats near the front, where they waited for proceedings to begin. When Victor Blackwood was led into the courtroom in chains, Harriet felt a chill run through her. He was a large man with cold eyes and an arrogant bearing despite his circumstances. His gaze swept the courtroom and fixed on Harriet with such hatred that she instinctively shrank back. Finley's arm came around her shoulders, and he stared Blackwood down until the prisoner looked away. He can't hurt you anymore, Finley whispered. Remember that. The trial lasted 3 days, with numerous witnesses testifying to Blackwood's criminal activities throughout the territory. When it came time for Harriet to take the stand, she felt as if her legs might give way beneath her. But one look at Finley's encouraging face in the crowd gave her the strength she needed. In a clear, steady voice, she recounted what she had seen the day of her father's murder. She described the confrontation, the demands for documents, the cold-blooded shooting that had taken her father's life. Throughout her testimony, she kept her eyes fixed on either the judge or Finley, refusing to give Blackwood the satisfaction of seeing her fear. When the verdict finally came guilty on all counts, with a sentence of hanging to be carried out within the week, Harriet felt no joy, only a profound relief that justice had been served and that her father's killer would never harm anyone else. Outside the courthouse, reporters from the local newspaper surrounded them, eager for statements. Marshal Jenkins intervened, escorting Harriet and Finley back to the hotel where they could have some privacy. It's over, Harriet said as they sat together in the hotel lobby. I can hardly believe it. You did it, Finley replied, taking her hand. Your courage made this happen. What happens now? She asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. Finley's expression grew serious. That depends on you, Harriet. I meant what I said back at the ranch. I want you to come back with me to stay, but I understand if you need time or if you've reconsidered. Harriet squeezed his hand. I haven't reconsidered, not for a moment, but there are things I need to settle first: my father's estate, his affairs at the bank. It might take a few weeks. I'll wait, Finley said simply. However long it takes. The next morning, Harriet met with her father's colleague at the territorial bank to begin sorting through his affairs. To her surprise, she discovered that Edward Goodwin had been quite successful in his investments, leaving her a substantial inheritance. She was now a woman of independent means, free to make her own choices about her future. Your father was very proud of you, Miss Goodwin, the banker told her. He often spoke of your intelligence and character. He would want you to use this inheritance to build the life you desire. Harriet left the bank with a newfound sense of purpose. Her father had given her not just financial security, but the freedom to follow her heart. And her heart was leading her back to the Ross ranch, back to Finley. That evening, she shared the news with Finley over dinner. "It appears I'm wealthier than I realized," she said with a small smile. "Father made some very sound investments over the years." Finley nodded, though she detected a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "That's good news. It gives you options." "It does," she agreed, "and I've decided how I want to use this inheritance." "Oh?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Harriet reached across the table for his hand. "I want to invest in the future, our future, if you'll have me. The ranch could expand its operations with additional capital. Perhaps breed better stock, hire more hands." Finley stared at her in surprise. "Harriet, I don't want your money. That's not why I asked you to stay." "I know that," she assured him. "But we would be partners in life, why not be partners in business as well? Unless you're too proud to accept a woman's investment in your ranch." A slow smile spread across his face. "When you put it that way, it does sound rather foolish to refuse." "But are you certain this is what you want? A life on a cattle ranch is a far cry from Boston society." "I've never been more certain of anything," Harriet replied with conviction. "The past few weeks have shown me what truly matters in life. I want a home filled with love and purpose, not empty social conventions. I want to be with you, Finley." The tenderness in his gaze made her heart swell. "Then it seems we have plans to make, Miss Goodwin." "Indeed we do, Mr. Ross," she replied, smiling through the tears of happiness that threatened to spill. It took nearly a month to settle Edward Goodwin's affairs in Helena. During that time, Finley returned to the ranch to tend to his responsibilities there, but he rode into town at least once a week to see Harriet and help with any decisions that needed to be made. Each time they parted, it grew more difficult to say goodbye, their feelings for each other deepening with every conversation, every shared moment. They spoke of the future, making plans for the ranch and for their life together. Finally, on a bright spring morning, Harriet stood on the boardwalk outside the bank, having just signed the final documents transferring her father's assets into her name. Finley waited nearby with 2 horses, his own Thunderbolt, and a gentle mare he had purchased specifically for Harriet. "Ready to go home?" he asked as she approached. "Home." The word filled her with warmth. "More than ready," she replied. They rode out of Helena side by side, leaving behind the noise and bustle of the growing town. As they traveled through the stunning Montana landscape, Harriet felt a sense of rightness that confirmed she had made the correct choice. "I've been thinking," Finley said as they rode. "About us, about the future." "Oh," Harriet prompted, curious about his serious tone. He guided his horse closer to hers, their legs nearly touching as they rode. "I know we've talked about you staying at the ranch, investing in it, building a life together, but I realize I haven't properly asked you the most important question." Harriet's heart began to race as Finley reined his horse to a stop in a meadow filled with wildflowers. She followed suit, turning to face him. "What question is that?" she asked, though she suspected she knew. Finley dismounted and moved to help her down from her horse. Once they were standing face to face among the wildflowers, he took both her hands in his. "Harriet Goodwin," he said, his voice deep with emotion, "when I found you by that creek, your hair matted from sleeping in the dirt, something told me my life was about to change forever. I never expected to love again after losing Caroline and Emily, but you've brought light back into my world." Tears blurred Harriet's vision as Finley continued. "I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures," he said. "But I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my days showing you that love. Will you marry me, Harriet? Will you be my wife, my partner, the heart of our home?" "Yes," she whispered, joy bubbling up inside her. "Yes, Finley, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms then, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, they were both smiling, their futures stretching before them like the vast Montana sky full of promise and possibility. "Martha will be pleased," Finley said with a chuckle as they remounted their horses. "She's been hinting about wedding plans since I told her you were coming back for good." Harriet laughed, happiness making her feel light as air. "Then we shouldn't disappoint her." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony on the ranch, with Martha, Jackson, the ranch hands, and a few neighbors as witnesses. Harriet wore a new dress of cream-colored silk ordered from Helena, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Finley, looking handsome but slightly uncomfortable in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him in the flower-decorated barn that had been transformed for the occasion. The minister, who had ridden out from Clearwater, spoke of love, commitment, and building a life together. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Finley kissed Harriet with such tenderness that several of the guests wiped away tears. The celebration afterward was joyful, with food, music, and dancing lasting well into the night. When the last guest had departed, Finley swept Harriet into his arms and carried her across the threshold of the house, their house now. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ross," he said softly as he set her down in the sitting room. Harriet looked around at the familiar space, now filled with new meaning. "It feels different somehow," she observed, "knowing this is truly my home now." "Our home," Finley corrected, pulling her close. "And we have a lifetime to make it exactly what we want it to be." In the months that followed, Harriet threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm and determination. She learned to ride better, to help with the cattle, to manage the household accounts. With her inheritance, they were able to purchase additional land, expand their herd, and make improvements to the ranch buildings. Martha, delighted to have another woman in the house, taught Harriet all the skills she needed to be a successful rancher's wife. Though there were occasional missteps and moments of frustration as Harriet adjusted to her new life, the love between her and Finley only grew stronger. A year after their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a daily ritual they had established, Harriet took Finley's hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "I have news," she said, her eyes shining with happiness. "We're going to have a baby." Finley's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the span of seconds. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with emotion. "You're certain?" Harriet nodded. "Dr. Lawrence confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're expecting a child in the spring." For a moment, she saw a flicker of fear in Finley's eyes, the memory of his lost daughter still capable of causing pain. But then he pulled Harriet into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For this gift, for your love, for everything." "We're building a family, Finley," Harriet said, her own voice thick with emotion. "The family we both thought we'd never have." That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Finley's hand rested protectively over Harriet's still flat stomach. "I never thought I could be this happy again," he confessed quietly. "After losing everything, I thought that part of my life was over." "I felt the same way after losing my parents," Harriet replied, nestling closer to him. "As if happiness was something that happened to other people, not to me. And now," he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Now I know that life can surprise you," she said. "That even after the darkest times, there can be light and love again." In the spring, as wildflowers once again carpeted the meadows around the ranch, Harriet gave birth to a healthy son they named James Edward Ross, honoring both Finley's father and Harriet's. Martha, self-appointed grandmother, doted on the baby, while Finley proved to be a devoted, if sometimes anxious, father. The sound of a child's laughter once again filled the house that had known too much sadness. As the years passed, the Ross Ranch thrived under Finley and Harriet's joint stewardship. They added a daughter, Elizabeth Martha, 2 years after James was born, completing their family. The children grew strong and capable, learning to ride almost before they could walk, developing the same love for the land that their father had. Harriet never regretted her decision to leave behind her Boston upbringing for the challenges and rewards of ranch life. In Finley, she had found not just a husband, but a true partner who valued her mind as well as her heart. Together, they built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Finley surprised Harriet with a special gift, a new rocking chair for the porch, handcrafted by a carpenter in Helena. "So you can watch the sunset in comfort for the next 50 years, he told her as he set it in her favorite spot. Harriet ran her hand over the smooth wood, touched by his thoughtfulness. 50 years, she repeated with a smile. That sounds just about right. That evening, as they sat side by side watching the sun sink below the mountains, their children playing nearby, Harriet reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the terrifying days on the run after her father's murder to the moment Finley had found her, exhausted and desperate, by that creek. "What are you thinking about?" Finley asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead us to the best," she replied. "If my father hadn't been killed, if I hadn't been forced to flee, we would never have met." Finley took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I thank God every day that I found you," he said softly, "even though I wish it had been under different circumstances. Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Harriet asked. "When you brought me here," Finley smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with the expression that still made her heart skip a beat. "I said, 'Tonight you rest under my roof.' And now it's our roof," Harriet said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Our home, our life." As darkness fell over the Montana wilderness, Finley and Harriet Ross remained on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built together, a life founded on courage, compassion, and a love that had healed them both. The cowboy who had once offered shelter to a desperate woman with matted hair had found his own salvation in that act of kindness. And Harriet, who had lost everything, had discovered that sometimes you have to lose your way completely before you can find your true path home.